was being discovered. At the University of Missouri, records were found of a Dr. Evelyn Wide Brandt. She died in 1987, age 56, and left everything to her daughter, Gabrielle, age 21. Gabrielle had received nearly $200,000. On the death certificate, it stated that Dr. Brandt had died of lung cancer. By the time Fitch was told this, they knew more. Dr. Brandt's husband, Dr. Peter Brandt, had died in 1981 at the age of 52, leaving everything to his dear wife Evelyn and his daughter Gabrielle. He'd also died of lung cancer. Fitch took the telephone call from Swanson alone, with the door locked. At first, he was too shocked to react. Both of Marlee's parents had died of lung cancer? He wrote it down on a yellow pad as if he could analyze it, as if he could somehow make it fit in with her promise to deliver a verdict. He closed his eyes and rubbed his head. He must stay calm. There was nothing he could do to stop the jury's discussions. They were in there with deputies by the door. Fitch made a list of possible things he could do, all of which would be dangerous, illegal, and would fail. He slowly rose to his feet and took the glass lamp in both hands. Conrad and Pang were standing outside and heard a crash as the lamp hit the wall. Fitch shouted something about the money. Then the desk hit the wall. "Find the girl!" he screamed. "Find the girl!" After the period of forced concentration, Nicholas decided that some debate was needed. He started by summarizing a report on the state of Jacob Wood's lungs. His audience was bored.
"I have an idea," Ricky Coleman said. "Let's see if we can all agree that cigarettes cause lung cancer."
"Fine with me," said Nicholas. "Raise your hands if you believe that cigarettes cause lung cancer." 12 hands went up in the air. "Who thinks nicotine is addictive?" Another yes vote. "Let's keep united, folks," Nicholas said. "It's really important that we walk out of here voting the same way." Most of the jurors had heard him say this before. The legal reasons weren't clear, but they believed him anyway. They continued to work through the reports. They left the room to smoke and to stretch. Lou Dell and 2 deputies guarded the door. After another juror had summarized a report on the contents of cigarette smoke, Lonnie Shaver spoke. "I thought we decided that cigarette smoke was harmful." He looked at Nicholas. "I say we get on with the voting. I'll go first." He took a deep breath, and everyone turned to watch him. "My position is easy. I believe cigarettes kill. That's why I leave them alone. Nobody can force you to smoke, but if you do, you'll suffer the consequences. Don't smoke for 30 years and then expect me to make you rich. These crazy lawsuits need to be stopped."
"Do you know when I started smoking?"
said Angel Weiss.
"I remember the exact day. I was 13, and I saw this really good-looking guy, all smiles, perfect teeth, with a beautiful girl on his arm and a cigarette in one hand. What great fun, I thought. That's the good life. So I went home, got my money, and bought a pack of cigarettes. Don't try and tell me anyone can give up. I'm addicted."
Lonnie said nothing. The arguments continued, then the jury returned to their reading. At 5 o'clock, Judge Harkin called them back. "You've had the case for 5 hours. I'd like to know if you're making progress." Nicholas stood up. "I think so, Your Honor. We're determined to finish and have a verdict sometime tonight." "Wonderful. Thank you. Dinner is on the way. I'll be in my chambers if you need me." Dinner was over at 6:30, and the jury agreed to vote. "Are you willing to hold Pinex responsible for the death of Jacob Wood?" asked Nicholas. 4 jurors voted yes, 4 no, the rest weren't sure. "I think it's time for you to say what you think," Lonnie said to Nicholas. "Okay," he said. He'd practiced this speech and spoke very persuasively. "I'm certain that cigarettes are dangerous. They kill 400,000 people a year, and they're full of nicotine. I think cigarettes killed Jacob Wood, and I am also certain that tobacco companies lie and cheat and do everything in their power to persuade kids to smoke. They are selfish and greedy and should be punished." Ricky Coleman and Millie Dupree felt like clapping. "You want punitive damages?" asked Jerry. "The verdict means nothing if it's not significant. It has to be huge." They went round the table again. 7 for the plaintiff, 3 for the defense.
"How much money do you have in mind for Celeste Wood?"
asked Ricky. $1 billion. Mouths fell open. "That's ridiculous," said Lonnie. At that moment, most of the other jurors agreed. The discussions continued. Finally, they agreed 10 votes to 2 that Celeste Wood should receive $2 million in actual damages. After the mention of $1 billion, $2 million seemed a very small amount. Again, they voted 10 to 2 for punitive damages. "Any idea of how much?" asked Nicholas. "I have an idea," said Jerry. "Get everyone to write down their amounts on a piece of paper, then add them up and divide by 10. That way we'll see what the average is." The jurors quickly wrote their numbers on pieces of paper. Nicholas slowly unfolded each piece of paper and called the numbers out to Millie, who wrote them down. 1 billion, 1 million, 50 million, 10 million, 1 billion, 1 million, 5 million, 500 million, 1 billion, and 2 million. Millie did the math.
"The average is $356,900,000.
Lonnie jumped to his feet. "You're crazy," he said, and left the room, banging the door behind him. Another juror looked shocked. "I can't do this. I'm retired, okay? I have enough money, but I can't understand these figures." "These numbers are real," Nicholas said, "and the company is very rich. It has $800 million in cash. We've got to think big or they won't take any notice."
"What will happen to the tobacco industry if we bring back a big verdict like this?"
"There'll be a lot of action. The industry will have to examine their advertising plans again. They'll go to the government and demand special laws. But I suspect they'll get less and less help. The industry will never be the same," Nicholas answered. "We need to decide on an amount, folks, if we want to go home." "I have an idea," said Jerry. "Let's take it up to $400 million. Half their cash." "Count the votes," said Nicholas. 9 hands went up. He filled in the verdict form and made everyone sign it. Lonnie returned. "We've come to a verdict, Lonnie." "What a surprise. How much?" $2 million and $400 million. Care to join us?" "Hell no," answered Lonnie. Nicholas walked to the door and asked Lou Dell to inform Judge Harkin that his jury was ready. While they waited, Lonnie whispered to Nicholas, "Is there any way I can say that I didn't agree?" He was more nervous than angry. "Sure, don't worry. The judge will ask each of us if this is our verdict. When he asks you, make sure everyone knows you don't agree with it." "Thanks." Chapter 15. Fitch's Surprise. Lou Dell delivered a note from Nicholas to the judge. In it, Nicholas asked for a deputy to accompany him from the courthouse as soon as the trial was finished. He said he was scared. The judge gave the necessary instructions and then went into the courtroom. The atmosphere was full of anticipation. Lawyers were walking around, nervous and wild-eyed. It was almost 8 o'clock. "I have been informed that the jury has reached a verdict," Harkin said loudly. "Please bring in the jury." They came in looking serious. Lou Dell took the verdict form from Nicholas and handed it to the judge. His face showed no reaction to the extraordinary news he was holding. He was very shocked, but there was nothing he could do. It was technically correct. There would be action to reduce it later on, but he couldn't do anything now. He gave it back to Lou Dell, who asked Nicholas to read it. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff Celeste Wood and grant her damages of $2 million. Wendell Rohr and his lawyers breathed a huge sigh of relief. They'd just made history. But the jury wasn't finished. "And we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff Celeste Wood and grant punitive damages of $400 million. Cable sank down into his chair as if he'd been shot. The other defense lawyers stared at the jury box, mouths open, eyes wide in total disbelief. "Oh, my God," one of them said. Roar was all smiles as he put his arm around Celeste Wood, who'd started crying. The other lawyers with Roar congratulated each other. Oh, the thrill of victory, the thought of sharing 40% of this verdict. "Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Judge Harkin said, "I am going to ask each of you individually if you voted in favor of this verdict." "I did," answered Nicholas Easter and 6 others. When it came to Lonnie, he said loudly, "No, Your Honor, I did not. I disagree with this verdict entirely." 2 more jurors said they hadn't voted for the verdict, but the final 2, Sylvia and Jerry, stated they'd supported it. The vote was 9-3. Nicholas was extremely worried that Fitch wasn't in court. How much did he now know? Nicholas wanted to get out of the courtroom and leave town. The judge thanked the jury and told them that they couldn't tell anyone about the discussions they'd had. They were dismissed. Fitch was watching from the viewing room in his office. He was alone. All the jury consultants had been dismissed. He'd discussed what he could do with Swanson. They could kidnap Easter, but he wouldn't talk, and they'd go to jail for it. They decided to follow him, hoping he'd lead them to Marley. But what could they do if they found her? They couldn't report her to the police. Fitch was trapped, whatever he did. Nicholas left court quickly without saying goodbye to anyone. At the back entrance, the sheriff was waiting for him in his car. "Judge said you needed some help." Nicholas directed him to a large apartment building north of town and got out, thanking the sheriff. He then got in a new rental car that Marley had left there 2 days ago and drove to Hattiesburg, where a private plane was waiting. He arrived in Georgetown with new Canadian papers. Marley met him at the airport. They kissed. "Have you heard?" he asked.
"Sure, it's all over CNN,
she said.
"Was that the best you could do?"
she asked with a laugh. They kissed again. They went to the beach and sat in the sand alone as the waves washed across their feet. What a moment it was. Their 4-year operation was over. Their plans had finally worked. Perfectly. Marley went alone to the Royal Swiss Trust Bank the following day. Marcus greeted her in his office.
"Your trade in Pinex shares seems to have been extremely successful. I've been on the phone to New York, and things are really confused. The verdict has surprised everyone. Except you, I guess."
There were so many questions he wanted to ask, but he knew there would be no answers.
"They might stop trading for a day or 2.
He looked at his computer and spoke to someone in New York.
"They're offering Pinex shares at $50.
2 minutes passed. His eyes never left the computer screen.
"They're at 45 now. Yes or no?" "No. What about the others?"
Marcus's fingers danced across the keyboard.
"The entire tobacco industry is down." "Check Pinex again," Marley said. "Still falling. 42, with a few small buyers. Buy 20,000 shares at 42.
A few seconds passed before he said, "Confirmed." The Marley-Nicholas team had just made $740,000, less the bank's fees. She went on buying slowly. The quick kill was happening. She'd planned this very carefully, and she'd never have another opportunity. A few minutes before noon, with the market still very upset, she'd finished. Marcus wiped his forehead.
"Not a bad morning, Ms. McRoland. You've made over $8 million, less fees." "I want the money transferred to a bank in Zurich."
She handed him written instructions.
"Immediately, please."
She packed quickly. Then Nicholas and Marley flew first class to Miami, where they waited 2 hours and flew on to Amsterdam. They watched the news in the plane. Wall Street was going round in circles. Experts were speaking everywhere. Judge Harkin had no comment. Cable couldn't be found, but Roar finally came out of his office and took the credit for the victory. From Amsterdam, they flew to Geneva, where they rented a hotel apartment for a month. Fitch left Biloxi 3 days after the verdict. His future as director of the fund was in doubt, but his firm had plenty of other work. Not as well paid as the fund, however. A week after the verdict, he met with Luther Vandermeer and D. Martin Jankel in New York and confessed every detail of his deal with Marley. It wasn't a pleasant meeting. He also discussed with other New York lawyers the best way of attacking the verdict. The fact that Easter had disappeared immediately was suspicious. Herman Grimes had agreed to release his medical records, which showed that he'd been fit and healthy until that morning. He remembered an odd taste to his coffee. Then he was on the floor. Colonel Frank Herrera had already given a sworn statement which said that the magazines under his bed weren't his. The mystery surrounding the verdict increased. The New York lawyers didn't know about the Marley deal. They never would. Cable was planning to ask permission to interview all the jurors, an idea that Judge Harkin seemed to like. How else could they find out what had happened in there? Lonnie Shaver was particularly anxious to talk. He'd received his promotion and was ready to defend American business. The appeal would be long and difficult. Rohr's future was filled with opportunity. Extra staff were employed just to answer the phone calls from other lawyers and possible victims. Wall Street seemed more sympathetic to Rohr than to the tobacco industry. The share prices stayed low. Anti-smoking groups openly predicted the bankruptcy and eventual death of the tobacco industry. 6 weeks after he left Biloxi, Fitch was eating lunch alone in a tiny Indian restaurant near DuPont Circle in Washington. It was snowing outside. She appeared from nowhere.
"Hi, Fitch," she said, and he dropped his spoon.
"What are you doing here?" he said without moving his lips. He remembered how pretty she was. Her hair seemed shorter.
"Just came to say hello."
"You've said it."
"And the money is being returned to you as we speak. I'm transferring it back to your account. All $10 million, Fitch."
He could think of no quick response. He was looking at the lovely face of the only person who'd ever beaten him. "How kind of you," he said.
"I started to give it away, you know, to some of the anti-smoking groups, but we decided against it."
"How's Nicholas?"
"He's fine."
"Why are you returning it?"
"It's not mine. I never planned to keep the money. I just wanted to borrow it. Tell me, Fitch, did you find Gabrielle?"
"Yes, we did."
"And her parents?"
"We know where they are."
"Does it make more sense now?"
"It makes more sense, yes."
They were both wonderful people. They were intelligent and energetic and loved life. They both got addicted to cigarettes in college, and I watched them fight their habit until they died. They died terrible deaths, Fitch. I was their only child. My mother died at home on the sofa because she couldn't walk to her bedroom.
She paused, but her eyes were surprisingly clear. It must have been sad, but Fitch could feel no sympathy. "When did you start this operation?"
"Graduate school. I studied finance, thought about law, and then I dated a lawyer and heard stories of tobacco litigation. The idea grew."
"An amazing idea."
"Thanks, Fitch. From you, that's a nice thing to hear."
"Are you finished with us?"
"No. We'll watch the appeal closely. And if your lawyers go too far attacking the verdict, then I've got copies of the bank transfers. Be careful, Fitch. We're proud of that verdict, and we're always watching. And remember, Fitch, next time you go to trial, we'll be there."